Hello, everyone. Welcome to Somerset Community TV. My name's John Harlow, and today I have our Wesley Clement, the author, with us. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, John.
So, give us a little bit of background information.
Well, I'm definitely a Central Maine product.
Do you go by your author name, or do people know you as?
No, most people know me depending. I have a big family. I'm considered in my family. I'm Bobby,
Yep.
right, by a lot of my older siblings. Bob by a lot of my friends. Robert by some of my teachers.
Yep.
And my grandkids call me Old Bob.
Yes.
So I answer to all of them
Yep.
when I can hear them.
Right.
I have a little bit of a hearing problem, and it's been this summer been actually difficult. I've had a lot of ear infections, so
Yeah.
if I don't hear you, I'll ask you to repeat
Yes.
it.
Yep. No problem.
Okay.
So, where were you? Where did you grow up?
Okay. Actually grew up in East Madison, Maine. Okay. Moved there from Skowhegan when I think I was about 2 years old, and so my earliest memories are from East Madison. And I spent until the 7th grade in the Madison school system. First in the little one-room schoolhouse up in East Madison, and
Yep.
then later on in Madison. Moved to Skowhegan in the 7th grade, and so from then on, education-wise, through high school, I was a Skowhegan boy,
Yep.
and Madison became one of our rivals. Went to Thomas College
Okay.
after spending a year in good old Medwood Footwear in Skowhegan,
Yep.
which is now New Balance.
Yep.
And that was probably one of my best teachers, being in that shoe factory. I
Yeah.
realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my
Yeah,
life there.
Yeah.
So I saved my nickels and my dimes, and actually got accepted at Thomas College. Ended up becoming a teacher,
Yep.
and taught for a total around Central Maine for 28 years.
Wow. You
I'm-
mentioned to me that you taught and were principal in Emden. What other schools did you teach at?
Right. I was at. I started out my teaching career at Lawrence High School.
Yep.
Okay, for 3 years. Then I went to Waterville High School for 5. Got my master's degree and got my first administrative position, Mumbloo Junior High. I was there in the middle school as an assistant principal. Then I got out of the business for a little bit, and I ended up working in the woods with my brother Zane, and opened a little restaurant in Norwich Walk that nobody remembers. I was called My Mother's Son, and had a lot of fun with that. Learned a lot about myself after leaving education, because I didn't have at that point you didn't have anything to follow. Okay, you just had to make your own waves. And
Yeah.
so I learned a lot about myself. Then I ended up getting hired in Emden.
Okay.
And I spent 5 years there as
Yep.
an elementary principal, as well as teacher of 3 grades, 6, 7, and 8 for those 5 years. Coached.
What'd you coach?
I coached. We started out with soccer,
Yep.
all right, and then we coached some basketball and some baseball.
Wow. All
Yeah,
different
did
stuff.
all that.
Yep.
Then I moved on to the high school, Carabec
Yep.
High School,
Yep.
as the principal.
Okay.
When we hosted Madison when their building burned.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was under my watch, and that was quite a year. But during that year, I got to know Tony Kraft, and he was the principal at Madison, and he invited me to join him in their new school that was being built, Madison School. So
Yeah.
I went there.
Yep.
Had never been an assistant principal, athletic director combination, so that was new. So I did that for 5 years. Went to Skowhegan as assistant principal for a couple of years.
So you were all over.
I did. I'm kind of a wanderlust. I've always felt like I did all I could in a certain situation and when I felt like I was being redundant, I needed to build new ground for myself.
Yeah.
So ended up coming back to the Carabec as a high school principal again.
Yep.
And
And how did teaching work its way? So how did you go from teaching to writing, and does it inform it, and
right.
does it work its way into your books at all?
Oh yeah. Well, before I retired, the year I retired the last time from Carabec High School, I lost 2 brothers in the span of 6 months.
Wow.
Both young men and both healthy, except for what killed them. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to die behind a desk. There are other pieces of me that need to be fed.
Yeah.
So we retired, ended up staying a couple more years doing different things, and waiting for my wife to retire. She was also, actually, she was at this school
Yeah.
for a long time as
Yeah.
the principal and kindergarten teacher.
Probably right in that room because
Right
the
in that
door
room.
says
Exactly.
principal on
Yeah.
it.
So I finally convinced her to make the move, and we went to Florida. So I had always written at different times for faculty meetings, for gatherings, and that kind of thing, comedian kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing of a extensive nature. But I got to Florida, and I was working as a card attendant at a golf course.
Yep.
Again, and I was working in an area that was filled with millionaires. Okay,
Yeah.
the whole community. So anyway, I was a card attendant, and I got challenged one day, and it was a hot day in August, and I was there was nobody playing golf. It was too hot. I'm sitting on the back of a golf cart, and a banker, an Irish banker, walked by, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" Looking at me like, what are you doing sitting there? And I said, I always wanted to write a book. Well, he went in and got himself a gin and tonic, and he was an Irish banker, as I said. He came back out, and he said, "Well, get off your butt and start writing."
Yeah.
I immediately went into the cart barn, and all I could find was a paper bag,
Yeah.
and I started writing my first book, As It Lies. Now, As It Lies it became an Irish story because he was an Irish banker. It also became a golf story because I guess at that point in my life I was dealing
Yeah.
with golf.
Yeah.
And it turned into a really, really neat story. It took on Irish tones, as I said, and so I did a lot of research about Ireland and about the game of golf. I had a pretty good understanding of, not as a great player, but I
Right.
understood the game.
Yeah.
So anyway, that became my first book, and when I finished it, I said, "Well, that's done, but I probably ought to see if I can get it published." I didn't have any idea. I went and bought a book on publishing, and everything that I read was discouraging. You need to send out
Yeah.
this and that for 18 months, and eventually you might hear back. Well, I said, "Well, I'm going to be the little red hen here, and I'm going to do it myself." So I went to the Yellow Pages, and I found a publisher in Flagler Beach, which was a town next door to where I live in Palm Coast. And I said, "I have written a book. Would you be interested in reading the manuscript?" And he said, "Bring it down."
Yep.
I brought it down. I left it with him. He called me. I'm pretty sure it was just like 24 hours later, and he said, "I stayed up all night reading that book." He said, "I loved it." He said, "Bring it back. Come on back down." We negotiated, and that became my first published book. And we've got this one, and first one, back in the day here, we had all 16 Mr. Paperbacks
Yes.
here in
Yes.
the state.
Yep.
Well, we were able to get that into all of them, and we
Wow.
sold quite a number of books.
Wow.
And I had good reviews from people that read it. So
Who would you say the target audience for that book was? Is it like adult fiction? But
Yeah, I would say everything I write, I call them soft mysteries.
Yeah.
All right? They're not... they're everyday things that happen to people.
Yep.
All right, and you get things that happen, and you have to figure out, how am I going to get out of this?
Yeah.
I got into it. How am I going to get out of it? So that's kind of the tone that I think I take in my stories.
Yep.
And that's what happened in that first book. And I had very strong women in the book, and they had to lead us men back to normalcy. There were a lot of odd things going on in that first story, and about a young man who's trying to make it on the golf tour. And he's got all these demons. He comes from a broken home, and he has to goes in search of himself, and also in search of a way to get on the golf tour.
So where do you find inspiration for the characters and the demons that they face and stuff like that?
Well, I can't say that there's any one place, but I'd say it's a composite of people that I've met over my lifetime.
Yeah.
Okay, and I also find that when I write these characters, I become that character.
Yeah.
All right. I actually find myself, when I'm typing and writing, I find myself saying the words. I find myself in character, almost like I could be in costume, and I see all of my writing when I'm doing it. I kind of see it as a movie.
Yeah.
As I'm going along. And everybody has their own way of developing their stories. Some people do outlines, chapter headings, do all that kind of thing. One of the things you find out about yourself when you start writing is how you think.
Right.
And what I found was that my thinking is cyclical,
Yeah.
and that I can take a character and start writing about him, and just leave him alone, right? And he's going to come back around again.
Yep.
And then wherever he should fit in that story, I don't have to have him here, and then I'm going to have him here or have him here. It just
Yeah, it just
naturally,
works.
organically
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's a skill that can't necessarily be taught, or maybe it could, but if it comes to you naturally, I think that's kind of the soul of a writer, I guess.
Yeah, I think you find out whether or not
storyteller.
you find out first of all. I think too is this a passion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or does
Because
it feel
it's
like work?
a very lonely profession. You're
Yeah.
sitting there doing your own thing. You don't know if anybody's going to ever see the light of day, if you're ever going to get published or whatever. But when I finished the first book, I said, "Well, there, I did it. I said I was going to do it. I did
Yeah.
it."
And what year was that you finished it?
I'm sorry.
How long ago did you do that? Did you finish that book?
That was my first book, and that was finished in 2004.
Yep.
When we first moved, 2004 to 2005, when we first moved to Florida. Yeah, I think it was 2004. So I thought I'm done. And then the second book, This Old House, surfaced because of those two brothers that I had lost. All right. We have this is a story of my family. Okay, I have 14 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
We grew up in that little house that's on the cover, and
And what town was this house in?
this is in East Madison.
Madison.
Yep. So we have family reunions. At that time, we had them twice a year,
Yeah.
and we've always been kind of a very animated family that has done a lot of crazy things. So at the reunions, they started saying, "Well, we've lost two of the brothers. Somebody needs to get all these memories down on paper before the rest of us are gone."
Yeah.
And so, because I'd written that first book, they kind of threw it at me. And I
Yep.
said, "Boy, I don't know if I want to write
Yeah,
be
it's
the one
a-
that writes a story about the family."
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Big shoes to fill.
So I said, "Okay, I tell you what I'll do. You send me, because I'm one of 15. There are almost two different generations." I said, "You send me your memories,
Yeah.
okay, what it was like for you, and then I'll add my own. And if I can make something that makes sense out of this, then I'll consider it." But interestingly, my mother kept a journal, and I didn't know
Wow.
that. My sister Patty sent me my page from that journal, a copy of it, picture of it. And in that writing about me, my mother described me at age 8 as very much sensitive disposition, creative, liked role play, and so she was giving me permission in the
Yeah,
journal
yeah.
to write it. So
Yeah.
I wrote it, and I set the scene for 1952. And the reason I said it there was I was just starting school,
Yep.
and I didn't want to go to school.
Yeah.
I climbed the trees with my brothers and sisters. That's
Yeah.
all we cared about doing, was having fun and playing. Suddenly I got to go to school. And at the same time, two of my brothers, my two oldest brothers, were just about to go to the Korean War. And that was kind of bringing a lot of turmoil into the house.
Yeah.
So beyond my own turmoil and the turmoil of my brothers maybe going off the war, the house that year was kind of just more dysfunctional in a way. And so anyway, that seemed to me to be a perfect place to begin. And I tell the story using a prop, if you will, and that was the old slate quarry that was across from our home that was supposedly bottomless, and we were supposed to stay out of that and stay away from that.
Yeah.
And
Which of course you didn't do.
of course we didn't do.
No.
And so I'm able to bring all of the voices of my brothers and sisters into the story in different ways as we go to battle with the state and federal government over that slate quarry. Because in 1952, slate played an important role as an insulator for all the electronic kinds of stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
of course we were at war. So anyway, that gave me a great place to bring us all together.
Yeah.
And it turned into I think, a really, really neat story. In fact, it's really maybe been my bestseller because so many other older people certainly have been able to find their own memories.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, in that story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like preserves a little bit of history and culture of that time.
Of that
and place,
time,
and
exactly.
people who
Right.
lived that way, and people who maybe didn't, but who would like to know about it.
Right.
Local people like myself, I have an interest in history and
Yeah. There's pictures in the book, okay, of early East Madison,
Yeah.
all right, and some of the places that we gathered, kind of thing, are in there, and a few pictures that give about celebrations that my family had, like at Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that, and so that kind of adds to the memories for people.
Yep.
You know what was going on in their lives at that time.
Right.
So that became my second story, and so then I said, "There, I'm done."
Right.
Right, I did. Now I'm
Now
done
you've
two.
Yeah.
Interestingly,
And how long after this one was published? So what year do you remember what year?
this one was published like in 2010 or 2012, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
a few years later.
Yep, yep. So I thought I'm all done, and then I had a personal experience with my daughter's husband. He was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's disease, okay? And we were living in Florida, and he's in North Carolina, and I couldn't get up there but all these emotions are going through me. My daughter going to lose her husband, the boys, their father, they're going to have to move back with us. All these emotions, and I had to get rid of them. So I wrote the book called Troubled Waters, all right? And it became my way of dealing with what he was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And so in it, we have a series of loss, possible loss, anger. Okay. And I created probably the darkest character that I've ever created for this book. And he ended up representing the cancer that we had to get rid of in order for me to get rid of those emotions.
So now you're really exploring the different functions of writing.
Right.
Now that you're on your third book.
Exactly. This was the first book in which I felt like I became really, really emotionally involved.
Yeah.
So it's my most powerful story, and it becomes a story of I used coffee, by the way, to drive the action. I sat there. My dad had a cup, and we've still got that cup, and I have it.
Yeah.
And so I set it down in front of my computer, and that's how I start my day. And so interestingly, the editors of the book, they saw that I used coffee to drive the action, and a lot of it.
Yeah.
And they actually put my sailboat, which plays a good major role in the story, they put it in a coffee cup, which I thought was pretty clever.
Yeah.
And anyway, it becomes a story of a little girl that begins with a little girl who gets kidnapped by two of her twin grandmothers, and she's taken down to Florida, and they live in Flagler Beach, but they work at a flea market. And the little girl's name is Elvis, and she has a voice like Elvis. And so as she grows, she's becoming more and more notorious, okay? And her mother's looking for her.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
Her mother had to go to jail because of one of the grandmothers, and so she's trying to find her. So the grandmothers get all nerved up about that finally, we're creating our own monster here.
Yeah.
So they end up coming back to Maine. And so the little girl summers in Maine for a while, and then they go back, and she ends up, after some things happen, she ends up coming to Portland, Maine, and works in a bar called Troubled Waters and starts singing there. Okay, the real bad guy in the story comes onto the scene with all of the sinister things that he's going to bring to the story, and so we do the dance, if you will, for how we're going to keep her away from this guy's clutches, and all, and still help her find her search for her mother, and turned into a really, really neat, powerful story.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
Yeah. So now I know I'm a writer.
Right. Now you're a writer for sure.
And I've determined that I am in fact going to continue to write.
Okay.
And so we're a product of our experiences.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I decided to remember again one of my experiences from when I was a young man, and that was the year I graduated from high school,
Yep.
which was 1964.
Yep.
But before that, I worked at the Skowhegan Fair. The Skowhegan Fair played a really important role for all of us growing up. That was our one outlet for the summer.
Yep.
I grew up picking beans and doing all that, and then you'd go spend a little money at the fair. And then when I moved to Skowhegan, eventually I worked at the fair, parking cars and
Yeah.
checking people out,
Yep.
making sure they had paid and all that business. So I decided to write about 1963-64, and immediately my senior year was taking on a tone that we weren't expecting, because in the fall of 1963 we lost John Kennedy.
Right.
Okay, I didn't even realize at the time, I was 17 years old, I didn't realize how impactful it was
Yeah.
for me. Really came back to me when I started writing the book.
Yeah.
And so our senior year, where you're supposed to be celebrating all your own success and you're moving on, it kind of took a backseat to what was going on in the country. The Vietnam War was bubbling up.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Right,
was
yeah.
Vietnam's about to start.
Right.
Civil rights movement is
Exactly.
in full swing. The country's in turmoil.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
It kind of came back to me in the song by Simon and Garfunkel, "The Sound of Silence."
Mhm.
Okay, and so the story, I decided to call it "You Going to Skowhegan Fair" because of what it meant, but also because that was kind of a I'm not sure what the word, metaphor for a different time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
A different time, and so I put the action around a fire that eventually did actually take place at the Skowhegan Fairgrounds. I moved that fire back to 1963 so that I could use it for what my
Yeah.
purposes.
Yep.
And so we as the seniors, some of us get involved in the mystery of who set this fire and why and what's going on. Created some very strong characters in the book. And I started the story with a young lady coming back to Skowhegan. She had lost her mother and was sent to live with an aunt in Florida. So I bring in a little teeny piece of Florida there, and
that's
her experience there.
Yeah.
And then she works her way back to Skowhegan. How do you think she comes back? She comes back
to work at
with
the fair.
working the fair
Yeah.
all the way up, because in the wintertime the fairs are down there.
Well, it's funny because actually my mom, who is from Massachusetts, when she was younger, she was, in high school, worked the fair circuit.
Yeah.
And she actually worked at the Skowhegan Fair 30, 40 years before
Wow.
she ever knew that she was going to move up this way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so the fair, in fact, this book was out and it hadn't been out very long, and this one came out, and my niece has always done a book club. She lives in Massachusetts,
Yep.
and so all these I had done the book club, and so the summer that this one came out, this one was still pretty new, and the girls in the book club decided that they wanted to talk about this one because they had had personal experience with the Skowhegan State Fair.
See, I think that's a cool thing, especially about your writing specifically. And I'm an artist myself, so I think that it's really interesting that to see where people can find inroads and where they can relate to your artwork or to your writing, which is art. And it's also interesting because from what you said, it's kind of a way of processing your own emotions and kind of learning about yourself through this process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I think any artist will tell you that they set out on something and they learned something about themselves that they didn't expect to learn.
Yeah. What I glean from all of my books now is and again, I haven't had a major publisher, and I probably never will. It's a really difficult process, but is that I've had really nice things said about my writing,
Mm-hmm.
and part of the reason for that is because people can relate.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I don't do shoot 'em up, all right, kinds of stuff, or
Because
science
who's
fiction, big
lived
kinds
that
of stuff.
life?
Right.
Very few people,
Right.
if anybody.
Most people have to get up in the morning. They have to cook breakfast. Put one leg into the trousers for
Yeah.
another, all right,
Yep.
and go out and do the job for the day, raise a family, and all that. And so if you can build into that with your
Yeah.
writing in some fashion,
Yep.
then they're gonna identify with it.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's really cool.
Yep.
And a good philosophy, because we don't even really know each other that well, but
Right.
my photography, I do kind of documentary photography, and I photograph the area of Central Maine, and it's kind of a lot of what you have said resonates with me. Preserving the way that life looks at a certain time in history.
Right.
Uh,
I described Skowhegan during those times when it looked very different than it does
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
You know, kind of thing. And so for a lot of people, when they drive down Main Street in Skowhegan or Madison or whatever,
Yeah.
they remember a certain building that's no longer there
Right.
or whatever, and what it meant to them. And,
Yeah.
So yeah, nostalgia. You know, I think nostalgia is good.
Yeah.
You know, it's nice to look back and.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a way of processing what's happened in your life or people you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So you have one more.
I-
This
yeah.
one to me is very interesting. I'd like to, of all the books
Yeah.
this one I'd really like to read.
Yeah. I think that well, I'm going to give you a copy.
All right.
All right,
Thank you.
I'll sign it for you.
Sounds good.
It's they all were a product, like we said, of our own experiences
Yep.
and whatever. And so this is all kind of a timeline of my life.
Yeah,
You know, as
yeah.
I go along. And so this latest story, which is the one I brought with me this summer, had meant a lot. I used real names of the kids in the story.
Yep.
All right, from Emden. I had 32 of them in one classroom.
Wow.
And so it was a different time of teaching. We used the community a lot more, I think, in many ways than we do now.
Yeah, certainly.
Very supportive community in terms of making sure the kids are outfitted for uniforms and
Yep. Winter
suppers
clothing
and,
stuff like
name
that.
it,
or,
right.
Yeah.
And so I needed to tell that story. I call it my 5 best years as a teacher.
Yeah.
Because I had these 32 kids, 3 grades.
Yeah.
They all had 6 subjects, right? So how am I
And you
going to?
have-
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I had to create some really, really different ways of using them as their own teacher.
Yep.
All right. The community brought in the community to teach a lot of skills that I didn't have.
Yeah.
And anyway, when I got to the point that I knew I wanted to write it, I sat down, and immediately I knew I didn't want to write it as Bob Clement. All right. I wanted to challenge myself beyond my recollection of the time by creating a scenario where I would have had to perhaps react differently than I actually did. And so I wrote myself in the story as a woman.
That's very interesting.
Melody Standish is the girl. She comes up, and she had taught out of state, came up here. She's a 32-year-old girl. And
what year does it take place?
this takes place like in 1980.
Yep.
Okay? And so she had to find a place to live, so she's very foreign to the area, which I wasn't. And so I kind of made sure that I was looking at things differently than I would if it had been me doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm married, she's not, so
Yeah.
I had to take that
Look
whole
outside yourself.
look outside myself. What's a 32-year-old girl? She's still young. She's still got romance on her mind. She's
Yeah.
still got to do her hair.
Right.
I don't have a lot to do. So it was very challenging, but it
Yeah.
was very gratifying.
Yeah. So
and
what led you to that decision that you wanted to challenge yourself and write from the perspective of a woman?
What made me do that?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want it to be I did this, I did that, I did that.
That's
Okay.
interesting that you say that, because I think, and I'll let you continue, but a lot of what I don't like about art or writing is when people interject themselves and make it about themselves.
Right.
And it sounds like through all of these novels you haven't done that.
Right.
You've learned from your own experiences, but it's not about you, the individual.
Right. And interestingly, I've had a number of people ask me. And by the way, the title comes from. And I'll give a little slight giveaway here. And that there is a basket of pebbles that appears on the lawn of the school. Nobody knows how it gets there. All right. Nobody really knows what it represents.
Huh.
But in reality, it represents each of those students in that building. Okay. And if you read the story, you find out how that comes about and why that is there.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's that book.
So at this point, you really kind of developed as a writer. You're challenging yourself with characters,
Right.
with metaphors, with even a little bit of. Would you say that there's any social commentary?
I think I don't want to be political at all.
Well,
but,
right, without-
but absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that there is a theme in all my stories of good versus evil.
Yep.
Okay. And that's kind of, if I had to say one thing about a common theme, would be that in all of my books, there is a very definite line of good versus evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And would you say that good usually prevails in your story, or
Good always has to
Yeah.
prevail.
Yeah.
All right. That's what keeps us up, gets us up in the morning.
Exactly, right, yeah.
Exactly. I'm a very much a optimistic person.
Yeah. You have to be.
You do. That's how I feel. I look for the good in people, and I look for the good in every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually have another book that I'm about to publish when I get home,
Okay.
and that will be a Florida story, pretty much.
Yep.
Okay. And
Because now you've lived there for a while.
right, like 16 years now.
Yeah.
But I took 2 years kind of where we had two major hurricanes
Yep.
in my area, Palm Coast, and along A1A, which is the whole eastern seawall of Florida. And I wrote a story about that, about a man starting a business and how that business grows as disaster strikes. But when you do that, when your business grows, you take on new workers,
Right.
and some of those workers aren't necessarily who you would choose if you had a choice. So anyway,
Yeah.
one of these workers gets embroiled in some situation, and he ends up actually coming up to Maine. All right, in a driving a big old big rig.
Yep.
Okay, first he rides in it, then he actually goes to work. Goes to work up in for a guy up in North Anson, a kid I had in school, Troy Dunphy, who has a trucking company up
Yeah.
there. So I always use Troy because Troy is in this story too, because he's got the dry sense of humor kind of
Yeah,
thing, and he was
Maine
like an old
humor.
man when he was a kid even.
I know a couple of those.
Yeah. So anyway, he comes out in this story too, and so we do get the main connection in there, but more of a Florida story than any of these have been.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And people have asked me, why don't you have a sequel for one of these
Yeah.
two? And I think about that, and as close as how I can come to a reason, is that this time that they existed in that book is I care to reveal about them.
Well, right. I typically, I think when people give suggestions or say, why don't you do this, they kind of come from a place where they don't really know maybe what they're talking about. But the way I from what you've said, you packaged it the way that it's supposed to be. It doesn't need, it's done in a
Right.
way.
Right.
You've said what you wanted to say.
Exactly. Said what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And I am going to challenge myself in a little different way this winter. I hope. And I say this so now they'll probably force me to do it.
Right.
Whenever
Right,
I've
yeah.
said something out loud, I've had to back it up. This book for me, of all of them right now, would make the best movie.
Yeah, well, I was, when you said earlier, you said something about a movie, and I was gonna ask you if you thought about making these into a motion picture.
So I have no idea how to
Yeah.
be a screenwriter.
Yeah.
All right. But there is a book called Dummies, Screenwriters
sure.
Dummies or whatever, screenplays. So I'm going to explore that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of independent filmmakers and stuff like that. You wouldn't necessarily have to go through a big
Right. Well, now that you have Netflix and
yeah.
Amazon, they're all independently creating shows and creating.
Definitely.
So I think if I can write it in the way that it should be written, I really think that it's a that's something, it's something that could go somewhere, because the characters are so powerful.
Yeah.
And they just beg
Yeah.
to be seen.
Yeah.
I can see those twin grandmothers
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
you know, in that story.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting.
And the real bad guy, I can see him. When I was writing it, that was the one that probably stayed in my head the most as a movie as I went all the way through it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like you were saying, you picture these things visually, and that to me seems like it would lend itself to being on screen.
And I always introduce my book to this area first, because this is where I grew up, and people have been very good. Like this one, I published myself, and I did, and so all the money that I put into it, I said, okay, I'm going to create a certain number of books, and if I can make enough to pay for those publishing costs, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And I sit here today and tell you that I did it.
That's good.
So now I've got the money to do my next one. It's already,
Yeah.
it's already to go to the publisher.
Yep.
When I get back.
Yeah, it's nice to not operate at a loss.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I'm it's not going to change my life if I make $1 million, but if I can at least make it a hobby that
Yeah.
pays for
Sustains
itself,
Yeah. Yeah.
then I'm happy with that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's very interesting. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say or like to talk about? We've covered these books and learned a little bit about you. You come back to Maine for the whole summer?
Yes, and I guess that one thing I would say is that through these vehicles, it's been an opportunity for me to reconnect
Yeah.
with people from different stages of my life.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I taught with, a lot of people that I had in class and for kids that come up. In fact, I have a little bit of when I go on Facebook and announce that I'm going to be doing this or that, I've had a lot of support and have reconnected with a lot of kids.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
nice to have that.
Yeah. In fact, two of the women in this story hadn't seen for years, and they're a little older. And so the other day I contacted them and traveled with my wife. We traveled up to their homes and gave them a copy of that. Darlene Mayo plays an important role as the cook in
Yeah.
that story. All
Yeah.
right, and you know what, a cook runs the show.
Yes.
All right.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and so I had to say thank you to her.
Yeah.
And then Marie Poulin, when I first went there, she was the kindergarten teacher, and she was the veteran. All right,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
newbie as far as middle school teaching, and so she took me under her wing and was very supportive and helpful to me.
Yeah.
So reconnecting with them and
Yeah.
then with a lot of the other people over the course of the summer has been really, really gratifying.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice to be able to put something out in the world and to have it be received by the people who have inspired it.
Right.
Certainly.
Well, and with your paintings, you're leaving a legacy.
Exactly.
All right. My when I'm gone, somebody maybe blowing the dust off something in the
Yeah.
attic or whatever,
Yeah.
and pick it up, and for a minute they'll remember something about a
Well,
time.
the mark that you left on the world. This
Yeah.
is to say that you were here and that you lived and experienced these things and left something behind for
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
people to. Yeah, I guess that means it's about time to wrap it up.
Well, thank you very, very
Yeah,
much.
thank you very much for coming on
I
and for
appreciate it.
talking
Yeah.
about your experiences and yourself as an author, and thank you for putting these out in the world.
Appreciate it.